Good morning. I've just spent a few hours putting together a series of tabs, and it's kind of apparent when listening to people talking about the alleged climate crisis that much of it is coming from an emotional place. And instinctively we know when something's wrong with what's happening in our communities and what's happening in the world generally. Certainly, if you watch the television and see the the evening news, one would think that everything was going to hell and back. But what I wanted to do was actually take a more sort of pedagogic look, if you like, at the the science and the shorthand. Now, all the emotional stuff, there's definitely a shorthand in narratives, and those are descriptive narratives and storytelling, which the climate educators tell us is very important because we don't understand this difficult stuff that the experts do. So this video is about the difficult stuff that the experts use. Now, the analogue I like for this is when the King James Bible was first published in English, at around the same time as Gutenberg invented the printing press, etc. The church at the time, because henceforth Bibles were actually in Latin, and most people couldn't read and write anyway. And so what was actually handed down regarding the Gospels, the Bible, etc., was an interpretation from a priest who would deliver deliver mass and what have you in Latin, and mumbo jumbo comes from that because it corresponds to a Latin phrase which sounds roughly phonetically like mumbo jumbo. I won't go into that, you can look that up. So anyway, let's just work through the slides. This is kind of part 4 now. I posted a slide presentation from Dr. Jeffrey Glassman, which talks about the scientific method and modelling. Next, then I did a video, The Climate Distinction, going through some aspects of this idea that there's a climate crisis. And then I did another one yesterday. So, and this is the next in that series. Now, this is where I actually produce my writing, and the extinction distinction. If I just click on this here, the previous 2 talks I did a transcript which I've dumped into Readsy here, which I'm going to be producing a small book for, which I'm likely to produce that and put it online as a paid for download. And obviously the videos are free and all the rest of it, but I'm in the middle of building a Web3 publishing portal. So anyway, those 2 talks are in part 1 and part 2 in here already, and I'm just right, okay, so what I've done is I've been turning those videos into a fictionalized account of them, and I'm in the middle of this at the moment, and this nobbled prize for falsification of scientific paradigms, and I sort of introduced the video stream. A greying middle-aged man in a curious t-shirt looks forlornly into the 30-inch Mac screen in his den in rural Sweden. The t-shirt reads, "Everyone get back, it's an arsehole." Running Linux on his 13-year-old Mac, which no longer can run the latest OS X. A phenomenal array of computing power surrounds him. He is nervous. Long nights of coding and hacking to evade the cyber cops could be blown if he reveals too much, but the minds of a younger generation needed to know the knowledge he would now be broadcasting. I mean, that's What I'm trying to do is actually tell a story about science and maths. I mean, I love science and maths and statistics. I mean, I'm a very analytical individual, and I find these things, I find them entertaining. And I just described the room I'm sat in, and the phenomenal array of computing power is, well, it's all around me. I'm not going to do a scan around the room. I'll post some pictures in the blog that will accompany this post of my phenomenal array of computing power. So where are we up to? Roger's long-haired blog, and you can, you know, search it in the search box. And I'm going to work through these slides, and some sort of shape will emerge from this into an essay. Now, this is a post that I did in November 2016, and it is entitled Climate Change, AGW and All Points from Activism to Skepticism. And it's a very, all the links in it work. The ones that do usually reference the Wayback Machine, depending what you have installed in your own browser. There is a browser extension you can put in Chrome for the Wayback Machine. It's this one. I haven't got that part of my screen actually in the screen capture, but that opens, and it opens a PDF. It's completely free. It's a shareable link, and it's a collection of you know, different writing, some poems, and it goes through the basis of climatology and what we know about the climate system, really. And the reason I opened that today is there was a paper in 2009 which falsified the CO2 hypothesis, and we're going to get to that in a minute. And I've got a couple of other things that I want to show you which have some scientific notation in them. And the scientific notation, I've also got some introductory things in what those funny little squiggles and Greek letters actually mean, just so you can feel a bit more comfortable about the Latin liturgy that's being delivered by the so-called experts, which is too difficult, allegedly, for your understanding. It isn't difficult. Scientific notation and mathematical notation is no different from shorthand notation for taking dictation in offices, shorthand secretaries or journalists or whatever use. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of that, just so you can feel a bit more comfortable about some of the technical stuff which is going to be cropping up, and you can spend some time figuring it all out. This is one of the links that comes up from the booklet, and it's called Reconsidering Science, CO2 Figures, Cycle, Solubility, GHG, that's Global Green Effect, Oceanic Scale, Biosequestration. There are a bunch of concepts in here which won't be familiar to you, and if you don't know the names Jaworski or Segelstadt, you know, don't despair. These things, you know, they are out there. They're just several degrees of separation away in your browser, and the Google algorithms try very hard for you not to get to them. But you know, I'm here to help, and the links will, well, the links are in that booklet, but they'll also be accompanying this. And that's the same thing. Now I'm going to close the ones that are up twice. Right, the CERN cloud experiment, that's what that is. The CERN cloud experiment, there are two scientists, an Israeli scientist, Shaviv, and a Danish scientist by the name of Svensmark. And CERN is the thing that has that very curious opening ceremony for the tunnel and all that sort of thing. It's in Switzerland, and that's the Large Hadron Collider people. And that's, I mean, pretty mainstream stuff. What's this one now? Hollow Science, the Electric Universe, Global Warming and the Climate of Ignorance. Now, I referenced Walter in yesterday's video, and this is his essay on, well, the parlous state of postmodern science, I guess. And this is Tom Sagelstad's blog, and again, this is from a link in the booklet. Forbidden, that's always a good sign. There's an article about Tom on Wikipedia, which has had the Connolly touch, shall we say. Scientific skeptics, where they impinge in the global warming alarmist creed, if you like, do tend and have been, abused basically, with ad hominem attacks and all the rest of it. And we'll come to DSmog blog in a minute. What else have we got here? Oh, this is one that was in the Wayback Machine. Now, Gösta Peterson was at London University, he's retired now, and this is about the kinetics of atmospheric carbon dioxide, where he looks into the bomb curves. And of course, you get along, and pretty soon you find these functions or equations and what they mean. We're going to come to that in a minute, and I'll explain to you, confronted with something like that, what that's actually saying. Falsealarm.net, that's another barred one. What have we got here? You see, as we go through some of these documents, there are lots of functions and what have you, but we're going to get to those. That's Tom Sagelstad's paper on carbon cycle modelling. So where we're getting to with this is you'll be able to have a look. This is actually a fun thing. It's again a link in the PDF that I did, and it basically allows you to look at the what the models say about the different scenarios. Now we're showing scenario B2 here in the IPCC report. See, this is AR4 WG1 chapter 10 page 803 figure 10.26, images courtesy of that. So scenario B2, which is talking about how big the population is, what medium growth, and this is based around the CO2 conjecture. I wouldn't even give it the billing of a hypothesis, and it's actually a falsified conjecture. But nevertheless, let's just look at this. Scenario B2, this is talking about the emissions, the concentrations, and then it shows how much warming that is supposed to give by 2100. So this is all of the Copenhagen, or if we don't do this, we're not going to get 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or whatever. So that's scenarios, and this is the worst case. Is this the worst case? No, that's got a lower population. Here we are. This is the real alarmist stuff. Emissions, concentrations, look at 800 parts per million. This is saying 2100 or 4 degrees of warming. Now, my contention is that in the models, as we've gone along, that's proven to be the case. Climate changes. There are natural fluctuations in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but there are fluctuations in lots of other very important factors, such as water vapor and clouds in the atmosphere, that have a measurable effect on climate. The CO2 is a trace gas, and the effect that it has is actually within the bars of error. And when we come up in a little while now to error bars, in functions, then or statistics. You have to bear these boundary conditions in mind. So anyway, but that's a fun thing to play with. I quite like that little thing. So this is Science of Doom, and this is talking about, this is a series on back radiation. Back radiation is really the crux of this CO2 argument, more of which we'll come to, but the links will be there. So, I mean, I've read pretty much every word on this website, and this whole this series is excellent. And then you can draw your own conclusions. This is produced by someone called Skiddens, and he's quite an aggressive debunker. I think he's got quite angry about it, really, which I think to an extent is understandable. Klaas Vark is the Dutch name of a legendary and fictitious gnome who visits children at night to sprinkle a few grains of sleeping dust on their eyes so they have sweet and positive dreams. Well, we've got the opposite of that, haven't we, with the climate crisis and Extinction Rebellion and the narratives which are coming down from the likes of Mr. Monbiot at the Guardian, the Manchester Guardian. But so yeah, Alan Siddons. Here's Alan's. Forgive me, Alan, if that other one isn't yours. I like your stuff, but yeah, we can all chill out a bit. Richard Lindzen is another famous sort of skeptic here. This is another bunch of slides from a link in the thing. Alan sort of tracked down where some contradictions in the IPCC reports came. There's a guy called Kevin Trenbreth that's done a lot of work on CO2 emissions from the ocean, and who gets mentioned in dispatches in Dr. Glassman's Rocket Science Journal. If you look at the acquittal of CO2, you'll Martin Wilde, he figures in the production of those graphics we were just looking at. This is from the Wayback Machine. These are the graphics which the IPCC put out and which Alan sort of called up, which now are only available through the Wayback Machine. So the link will be in this, and so you can have a look at that. And then we come to where I sort of come in all this. Now, I'm a poet and a musician. I mean, I used to be a property developer and a businessman and a real estate consultant, and I have in valuation, and I'm something of an expert on valuation and in something called the contractor's method of valuation, which is not the comparable method of valuation. Most people associate estate agents with valuing things based on, well, a similar one sold for this much last week, so yours, you know, must be worth this much, except you've got the wrong color carpet in your living room. People don't like that, so it's going to be worth less, and carry on like that. The contractor's method actually looks at how much it costs to build something, and then takes all those different components and basically gives you a net present value for all of those to the first year. And so you get into all sorts of things like discount rates and all the rest of it. And so if you get into discounting theory and all of that sort of stuff, as I have, you learn about Euler's number and the exponential function, and I mean, discounting, that's what it's all about. And that's how I learned about mathematical notation with respect to time series, really. But I mean, this, as I say, it's just like shorthand for journalists. You can use the same shorthand whether you're reporting on the 2:30 at Doncaster, whether you're reporting on a court case, or whether you're reporting on You know, the latest perverts sort of stealing Ms. Jones's knickers off Rigsby's washing line. So, you know, the maths and the science notation is raided, particularly by economics. They're very guilty of this, and then applied to, you know, often spurious and pseudo scientific theories. Anyway, the other thing, I've studied music theory a lot as well, and again, this is another form of abstract notation that people find difficult to get their heads around. That's what this is about. This blog here I did on modes of thought, and it's got a couple of, that's the jazz guitar lesson that I mentioned today. It's Howard Morgan, who's basically he's a chord melody, or was a chord melody expert. He plays fingerstyle jazz. And this is the Monkey Lord, Rob Chappers, with one of the best pitch access theory lessons existing. It's got nearly 1 million views on, which is anyway. So here we are. Music notation is another abstract form of getting an idea across. I mean, if you study things like harmony, which Pythagoras did, as well as given us Pythagoras' theorem. Let's just go on and develop this thought a bit further. This is in the Wayback Machine now. This is Robin Ford, who's got a famous guitarist, and his site. And that, I was hoping that video would download. I'm going to go back for that one, but I shall get rid of that for some. This is a very popular YouTube channel with some great guitar lessons for any guitarists out there. This is Bill Edwards' site, and Bill wrote this book, Fretboard Logic, which it's a wonderful, wonderful series, which comes with company DVD series. And Bill is the person that invented the caged system of understanding the guitar fretboard as it applies to standard guitar tuning. So from there, then you get into all the stuff about Bach and mean temperament and you know, the Western scale and so forth, which is just a way of dividing up an infinite series, which within boundaries. And then music notation basically gives us agreeable ratios within that infinite series. And this is exactly the same. These are exactly the same phenomenon regarding any phenomenon which is dynamic, which moves. You know, it's up and down, in and out, back and forth. And we conceptualize these and represent them in diagrams. And so you have two-dimensional gap that goes, so that's your X and Y axis. But then you actually, if you get into 3 dimensions, you then 3, and so on from there. And that's where you get into quadratic equations and all of that stuff. They're different ways of representing points of states, points of within a measurable distance, whether that's time or whatever. And my interest in guitars got into modeling and sound modeling, and the time domain and frequency domain in fast Fourier analysis. It is very pertinent to finite element analysis, which allows models to be built which can simultaneously calculate lots of calculations all at once. And so, you know, within boundaries, the models can be quite good. But I'm coming to the point about, you know, about boundary conditions and what we can sensibly say about the climate system and subsystems of that system. This is Justin Guitar, is one of the famous YouTube guitar, and this is his bit about Bill Edwards' book Fretboard Logic. This was 2011 when I said I'm missing my music, which I must say I am now. I love music. I've managed to continue writing some poetry, but I've been concerned over the last 2.5 years with writing a novel called Conquest of Dough. And the Conquest of Dough is about the monetary system, which is the root driver of all of the political economy that's going on, something particularly called petrodollar hegemony. But I digress. And there's a blog which I did again. There's the Monkey Lord, and there's the Jazz Harmony lesson. So let's go on now. What I did in 2014, I'd kind of got sufficiently into it, and what the gap in the thing, or the hardest thing for me to get my head around in music was time signatures, harmony and what have you, and rhythm wasn't such an issue. Although I don't have a great sense of rhythm, and I don't have a great ear for pitch, but time signatures just were really badly defined. So I made this hour-long video, which if you watch it, you should understand how time signatures work, and what the numbers mean in a time signature on a sheet of music. There's this harmony lesson again. This amused me, and it's up here. Assange published Russian government emails before he published American. A man, Seth Rich, dies. Investigation froze. The election culprits are caught, but news won't cover it. Remember the names of your election meddling: Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Bill Browder, Sergei Lushenko. And then this is why do I lie to myself? Because it pays. There's a famous aphorism which is I'm not sure if Tolstoy said it or something. Nothing is so difficult, or no idea is so hard to get across to another person when that person's salary depends on them not understanding it. Yeah, it's an interest. So, and this I marked this out to read later. It's furniture as a service, pass or fail. Furniture as a service, white goods as a service. This is the circular economy, and this is rights of use over rights of ownership, which is a great concept in terms of sustainability, and one which I must say I agree with. I share the concerns of people like Brian Garish about smart meters and their ability to snoop, and also to turn on and off the access necessaries of life. But I also see how they can be a great boon to liberty, if you like, in that what you're able to do with as I was saying, with increased computer power and finite element analysis, you're also able to, with smart contracts, do very small grain detail transactions, which allow for a huge amount of subsidiarity in the way that people interact, and how the usufruct of our common birthrights. If you read Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man, you'll get what I'm going on about here. Thomas Paine in The Rights of Man do pardon me, set out. So this was the blog of my Steam, which I recommended in the talk to look at The Story of Stuff. And The Story of Stuff is a wonderful, wonderful cartoon series which explains the need for the capitalist mode of production, mass-produced stuff, that the machine just keeps going for it to make any sense. So, our problem isn't one of abundance and scarcity. The problem that we have is to do with keeping the monetary unit scarce. So people focus on, inflation is such a terrible thing, which sure, yeah, it is. But deflation is very destructive, and in many respects worse. Effectively, what you need, and what the circular economy and what the distributed web and smart contracts can actually do, is ensure that mutual exchange in an uncoerced free market for ideas, goods, services, etc., will allow us to get at the abundance. That's what the Zeitgeist movement is all about, which I touched on the other day. I'm not a member of that, I'm not a member of anything, but they have some very interesting ideas. And this is Mr. Angry. I read this. This is in my PDF before this was. I'm not sure if it is Alan Siddons. I really not. But he obviously got fed up with no one listening. A bit like Clive Lord getting fed up with no one listening to him about the tragedy of the commons and citizens' basic income, and decided to graffiti his own chart. Anyway, it's all good knockabout stuff. So, scientific, which Clive Johnson I mentioned yesterday gets involved in, and I think that is Alan Siddons in that other picture. I'm not absolutely sure though, but I think Alan is okay with these guys, even though in his thing, some people criticize people they call lukewarmists. I'm going to come to this. The falsification of the CO2 hypothesis depends what you actually take the CO2 hypothesis to be, and it's not like it's not a fixed immutable thing. So but I'm going to come to that in a second. So whether or not I fall within the ire of Alan or not, I don't know, and I don't particularly care, but Principia Scientific is a good source, and take a lot. I couldn't give a damn if it's funded by it's if its arguments fall down, then challenge them with counter argument and counter evidence. Where are we? Okay, let's just keep going along. Here's what real science says about the role of CO2 as Earth's preeminent climatic thermostat. Okay, some of this might be quite seditious stuff. I mean, you read it and make up your own mind, like I say. Now, this is the one I wanted to get to, and this is a paper that came out in 2009. I looked up to see where these scientists, and one of them's got a very good channel. He's a good piano player and organ player, and one of them, sadly, I think, has passed away. But this paper by Schuschner and Gerlich came out in 2009, and does define what the greenhouse effect says it is and why it's a misnomer, and actually what the hell is going on with all that stuff. And it gets into Boltzmann's equations and black box and misapplication of various theories. And then here are these curious symbols again, which everybody gets frightened of, which is what the purpose of this video, which we're getting to, is to talk about that. It's a perfectly digestible paper. I mean, have a read of it. I think it's very good. Although it is, I think it's about 180 pages long. I'm not absolutely 115 pages. So that's the journal it came out in, and here's a summary of it, I think. Yeah, 6-page summary of it. And then here is the link on DSmog blog to it. This is something else. Again, some conference in 2019, probably worth going along to. This is Joe Nova, who's a good journalist that does some science rather than just sort of repeating retreaded propaganda. And this is mentioning this 195-page PDF, which comes from a French institute, which I wanted to look for along with the Gerlich paper, because I read these several years ago, and they are very good. Most people don't tend to get this into the detail of these things, but should you wish to, by the end of this video, hopefully you should be armed with sufficient sort of nous to not be frightened off by the strange Greek letters. This chap, an interesting chap, blog, mention him because he's related to that paper we're just looking at. And this key quote here has amused me. Putting our hope in environmentalism is the latest innovation of the devil to keep man from the love and grace of God. Should C.S. Lewis have written the Screwtape Letters today, he would probably add environmentalism to the list of Satan's tricks. Planting trees is not part of the gospel, even if man has always and rightly planted trees. Now, that's interesting because I'm a Christian, I'm very orthodox. I'm a Christian in the same sense that Jesus was, and Jesus was a Jew. So make that of what you will. But basically, this idea that, if you want something to believe in yourself. That's number one. But believing in the climate crisis is a wholly man-made political construct. And believing in things like political parties, or believing in something like corporate personhood, ancient philosophy, tends, I think, to sort of speak against that as being a good way of eating, if you like. Just referring to the idiom in Lao Tzu's poem, which I read the other day. Now, anyway, so this Screwtape Letters, I hadn't come across them before. I've read some Lewis Carroll, but not that. There is on my blog a letter from Satan to political economy people. There's a book called Future Money, by the academic and political guy in Bristol, whose name is temporarily escaping me, but I'll put it in the description. And it looks like it's it's very similar to the Screwtape Letters, just with a different object of fun. Who have we got here? Here we are, Screwtape Letters on there. And then here they are. Look, you can get a PDF, which I've started reading. So that's, yes, more stuff, and this is the sequel. That's shorter, but always more reading. Then this is a slideshow which came out of that little lot, and this appears to be the accepted sort of liturgy on global warming in 2010. So when I go through these slides and look at them critically, I can tell you are misleading. So this is Climate Etc. It's another blog. This is Judy Curry's blog. It's very, very good, and this is a talk that she gave on the debate, my presentation. It's June 2018, so the link will be there, so have a look at that. Now, that was the diagram that led me to this. Now, And this is what made me think, well, I better do this video about scientific notation, etc. Okay. Now, why this is interesting, okay, is that if you're going to have a model, you need boundary conditions, and you need to be able to have an experiment. And this is all about heat transfer in office buildings in an architectural journal. And the first two papers in this booklet I've read already, and they're very, very good. And this provides us, the greenhouse effect is a misnomer, which we're going to come to. But what's interesting about this paper, it talks about they have two variables, which is the air temperature and then the ambient temperature of surfaces within the control system that they put in to control basically the ambient temperature in an office building. And so you look at this and you look at these equations. This was the graph that this graph reminded me of the absorption levels. If you look at it in this axis, at which CO2 actually absorbs radiation. It's around 660 hertz or something. But anyway, this science here is basically climate science for an office space. And therefore it would repay the reading because it's actually a much simpler system than the climate system. They do mention CO2. One of the things they say is that CO2 light bulbs actually burn brighter if there is CO2, because CO2 isn't such a good conductor of so it doesn't absorb as much energy, and therefore there's more energy gets out in light. That's the thing, and that's a point that's actually made in that other paper, the Gerlich paper, and it's a point it's kind of made in this paper too. I've only read them or speed read them once. MATLAB. Now that's a program that everybody should have a copy of. But anyway, there's the abstract, and then there are these curious equations, which, if you want to come back to them, stick to the end of the video, and I'll give you the tools to be able to get back, have a look at that, and actually realise what the hell they're going on about. There we are. This is called tablature, which is another way of basically writing down guitar music. Tablature is actually older than standard music notation. It came out with the lute. Here we are, some block diagrams for chords and some chord stuff. What's the earliest published mention of it? I don't know if anyone mentions Bill Edwards in that thread, but poster gallery, the origin of the cage system. I'll have a read of that later. It's making me miss my music more than ever. This is my Les Paul forum. I was making a point earlier. I needed to find Bill Edwards' reference, and I knew it would be in there. Right, so Conquest of Dough, this is my novel. So Conquest of Dough is basically the website along with my novel, which I'm due to sit down and do a stint to finish it off. It's pretty much finished. Right, here we go. Expressing a function as a composition of two functions, all of this. Let's just go through what I prepared here. Power series representation of functions. This one was right. This was a much easier one, much simpler.
Is the power of
right. Okay. Where's the simplest one to start with? Yeah, this is the simplest beginning. So if you watch this one to start with, this sign here is called sigma. Okay, and this is where you have your variable, if you like, And then this here is the limit, or how many times you do it. And what this video talks you about is what it actually, when you see a sigma function, I mean, they do get to be looking a lot more complicated than this, but this one here is just saying if you add 1 through to 10 in a series, how would you notate that? And you would notate it like this. From 1, okay, I from 1 to 10, okay, I, and it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way through to 10. What does that add up to? And that's from 1 to 100. So that's basically your limit. And this is pi I squared. So that level, what this sigma function is actually doing. Then you get into expressing more complicated ones. So if we just, oh dear.
We have a function here being defined by an infinite series. And this infinite series, if we look at it with closer inspection, it's clearly a power series. Each term is a...
So you'll watch that in your own time, but let's just get to the point where basically it's just manipulation of the notation. And so when you're talking about series and what they are, you then get into talking about very big things and very small things, and that's where logarithms and what come in. So I'll put the descriptions of these so you can do in your own time, because I'm not going to watch them all with you. So worked example, evaluating functions from an equation. Got that there. Sigma functions limits. These are the search terms I got to sort of find something that explained it. So there's that one. Then logarithmic functions. Now, when we get into very big things, and you have logarithms, the idea of that is that you have to, it's called factorize it. When someone will say to you, well, it's an order of magnitude or a factor of 10 in different, what does that mean? It's talking about big chunks. And when you get into an exponential function, where you get into doublings, pretty huge numbers pretty quickly. And so how do you write those down? Well, you use scientific notation. You use this kind of notation here, and that's all those squiggly things are in these climate science papers. They're representing concepts. Sine and cosine functions is another one, and they're to do with the geometry side of things. And there's trigonometric functions as well, which is to do with triangles, and sine and cosine, they're to do with triangles. And then pi and all of that is to do with circles. And then you get into spheres and different dimensions. And it's just a way of describing points in space moving through those different shapes. You know, the simplest model to understand is that in a right angle triangle, the angles add up to 180 degrees. 90 plus 30 is 120 plus 60 is 180. I mean, this isn't a lesson, and I'm not lecturing here to get these across to you. If you're interested and you watch the links in these videos, even if you've got a basic grasp of mathematics, you can get this stuff. It's just, as with music theory, particularly time signatures, people tend to have it intuitively or not. And then if it's not intuitive, the people who have it intuitively are not actually that good at explaining it. I can explain it, but I'm not going to spend a bunch of time sort of teaching my computer about it. Now, what's interesting here, this is Kata's video, which talks about the difference between a 32-bit and a 64-bit int in computing, and how the larger precision in computing makes a very, very big difference to the granularity or accuracy of model predictions. This is in sound modeling. Now, that comes back to this point with finite element analysis and with just the sheer number of calculations that you can do within a computer with modern processing. You can fool yourself about how good your model is, but we can do a lot more now than we used to. Hence, Klaus Johnson has managed to resolve the Navier-Stokes equations and given a theory of flight and turbulent airflow around wings and sails and what have you. So that really gets us home. And then I just wanted to mention this other theory of gravity, and this is explained by Maurice Cottrell, who's an engineer. And the interesting thing about Maurice's theory is that he explains it in diagrams and words mostly, and there are not a lot. There are just a few very simple equations in it, but if you read his introduction to how hard it was or has been to get this published, you have an idea then with what Dr. Glassman's talking about when he talks about peer review not being science. Here we are. Here's the Newton's gravitational constant. And so this I'll put the link in there, but I mean do have a look at that and reference back also to the video Signs and Language and Chomsky and all of that, because it's all relevant. And then finally, I'm going to play out with this. This is from the film Agora. This is Hypatia, who was a famous mathematician in Alexandria.
Same proportion. Good, very good. Now tie this end to that torch. Aspasius, I want you to imagine that this is the Earth, and that each of these flames represent the two extreme positions of the sun in relation to it, in winter and in summer. What would happen if both these positions were the two centers of one and the same circle?
But it isn't possible, mistress.
Wait, what do we know about a circle? We know that the center of a circle is always the same distance from any point along its perimeter.
Exactly.
Yes, so what if I divide the center into two, but what I keep constant is the sum of their two distances to the perimeter? Oh, all right, look, I'll show you. Watch. As I move this rod along the cord, as one segment increases, the other segment decreases, and vice versa. Therefore, the sum of the two is always going to be constant. Do you see that? Now, what if we apply this to the movement of the Earth? What figure will we obtain? An ellipse! With the sun at one of its foci. Because what is a circle except a very special ellipse, whose foci have drawn so close together that they appear to be one? Perhaps I'm completely raving, Aspasius. I mean, really, why should this be so? Maybe I'm